I guess the main event. It's our longest standing event. It's the big one, as we like to call it. It takes place in Lisbon, Portugal, every November. Although this year we've had to shift to December. We also have global events in North America, which is where we run Toronto's event, which is Collision, or the 2020 iteration was Collision from Home. And we do an Asian event as well, which is called Rise, which will return in 2021 to Hong Kong. So I'd be responsible for all the sports output, all the sports speakers, and anything really related to the intersection of sports, business, and technology that takes stage either physically or virtually at our events.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And would sport kind of pop up in all those conferences? Obviously, you've very geographic spread there, Europe, North America, and Asia. So is sport at all of those?
Yeah, sport would play a pretty prominent part in our program overall offering, because it kind of proliferates so many aspects of business. You have the startup side, which athletes are becoming increasingly appealing in investing in startups. You have the investment side as well, and of course the branding and marketing side. Athletes over the last few years, we've seen them almost reclaim their brands from the sport they play or the organization they represent. So sport is a really good place to start with our event, because it touches so many different aspects of it, from the marketing, from the branding, to the startups, to the investments, and indeed just the business of sports itself. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry all across the world. It's one of the most popular pastimes we have. I always use the example of a newspaper. Page one is the news, and the second most prominent page is the back page. So it's such an important part of people's lives, and it's such a really important part of the offering we present at our three global events.
Yeah, absolutely. And when curating the sports tech newsletter, it's hitting all the main kind of talking points in the tech industry. And as you mentioned, the sport industry. So streaming, AR, VR, AI, data, marketing, social, crypto, like the list goes on, that there's application to the sports world for everything. So that's really interesting. So obviously you just kind of ran Collision from Home a couple of weeks ago. So obviously you've probably been planning it for 12 months prior to that. Obviously then 3 or 4 months ago, the world kind of imploded a little bit. So how did you guys react to that? What were the plans, and how did they kind of evolve and pivot as the world changed?
Yeah, it was certainly a strange time. I think what benefited us was we made the call so far out. A lot of other events almost waited until the local municipal cancelled the event or said that they couldn't stage it. We kind of got ahead of it. We realized the physical gathering of 30,000 people in the current climate probably wasn't the most responsible thing to try and pull off. So we quickly changed our focus to try and bring the event, as it were, physically to an online world. And I think one of the most important aspects of that was to retain some semblance of the networking, which really is the North Star of what our events do. We at the core of it, we bring together people and ideas that will hopefully change the world. And I know that can sound a little bit wishy-washy. We're not going to cure cancer at our events or anything like that, but we do try to bring together people who can change their industry and try to connect those people. So it was very, very important. We knew we had the speakers, that the content would be good, but we also wanted to make it just as appealing, not just for the speakers, but for the attendees, for the media, for the startups, for the investors, really the people that make the event a success. So I guess the engineering feat was much tougher than the content feat or the speakers feat. And that was all about making sure that we were able to produce an event that had that networking as the backbone of it, and had it as really the main appeal to the event. You could still do the same amount of networking and the same amount of business at a virtual event as you would as an in-person event.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I saw kind of Paddy Cosgrove kind of speaking into a newspaper here in Ireland, kind of talking about that networking, because I think when WebSummit started, WebSummit by night became one of the breeding grounds for all these relationships that become so important at a conference. I kind of hosted one of the pub crawls one of the years for you guys, so I really understand the importance of that kind of spontaneity, that serendipity of bumping into someone. So how did you guys pull that off in a virtual sense? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting aspects of the event was the mingle function. So a lot of virtual events have become, in essence, live streamed YouTube, which has the comment function, and it's not particularly groundbreaking. Where I think we separate ourselves from the pack was that mingle function, that basically it allowed you to meet random speakers. Now we say random, but they're all curated based on the likes that you input and the topics you want to discuss, which you fill in when you're setting up your profile, and then you meet people from the same kind of area. So it was a very, very important tool, and it allowed people to connect with either people from the same industry, stakeholders from the same bubble that they operate, or the same ecosystem they operate in. And it was really, really successful. It worked as basically you would log on to the mingle function and you would speak to a new person every 3 minutes. And if you enjoyed speaking to that person, if it was a valuable and meaningful connection, you could then regroup with them outside of Collision and continue the conversation. So people were so interested in the idea of having those impromptu meetings with people. The glory of a conference is you never know who you'll meet or what you talk about. And we managed to retain that aspect with the mingle function. It was really, really well received, which we were delighted for, because the engineering team haven't slept in about 4 months. So I found it a lot of fun as well. I didn't have a lot of downtime during the event. Our team generally doesn't. But anytime I did, I got on Mingle and I started chatting to people. And invariably, I found myself connecting with stakeholders from the sports industry and just having kind of mini conversations of where we're at and where we're going. I just found it so interesting. And I guess the mark of a good piece of technology is if you're enjoying using it as, you know, the proprietor, imagine what the attendees are feeling using it. So Mingle for me was a great success. I feel, I think it really separates Collision from Home from a number of other events out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like to kind of paint a bit of picture, is it almost like a chat roulette type thing where I enter a mingle, you enter mingle, and then, you know, an algorithm kind of pairs us together because we're both interested in sports, and then we have a Zoom call essentially.
Essentially, you're on the Zoom until you're ready to take a bow out and go and maybe watch some content or go and take part in a round table. You mingle for as long as you want. And I guess one of the funnier aspects of it is who ended up mingling. We had some of our top speakers at the event. I won't name them for the sake of their own privacy, who just found the novelty of, you know, chatting to people randomly really, really interesting to them. So essentially that's what it is. You don't know who you're going to speak to. You don't really have any kind of chance to put together a plan, but it's very, very natural and organic. It's almost like mingling at a party. You meet someone, who are you, where are you from, what do you do? And then if you find that kind of that Venn diagram of where the crossover is and how you guys might work together, or how two people might be able to connect in a meaningful way offline. And I think that will be the thing that distinguishes Collision from Home from the other events out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the most powerful thing about, you know, going to a conference, you know, that kind of unknown factor. You put on a great kind of headline act of all the speakers and sessions, but it's who else is interested in those types of talks, workshops, whatever. Like that's where the real value kind of comes from, as from attendee kind of perspective. So that's really cool to see that you're able to kind of put together a piece of technology to kind of facilitate that, because, you know, as you kind of mentioned, there's a lot of conferences that have popped up online, but it is very kind of sit back. You might be able to chat or ask a question, but there's potentially thousands of people in a similar boat to yourself that, you know, that those conversations could open up great things. So kind of moving forward, obviously your kind of primary, I think you called it the big one, the main event being WebSummit in Lisbon. It's obviously scheduled to be in December. So what kind of learnings can you take from CollisionConf to improve the experience at WebSummit later this year?
Yeah, it's a funny one. It's the big one, but we look at our events. We have the Super Bowl, we have the World Cup final, and we have the Rugby World Cup final. So they're all big ones in their own right. But WebSummit is, I guess, the longest one in the stable. It's, you know, into its 11th year now. This year's Lisbon iteration. So it's really, really exciting. We're going to build on what we did at Collision from Home. The platform was really well received, and we're going to take it to a bigger scale. We had 32,000 people at Collision from Home who logged on, who used the app, who consumed the content, who made meaningful connections, who attended breakouts, spoke to investors, spoke to startups. And really WebSummit will be similar, but to a much bigger scale. It'll be more than double what Collision from Home is. So it'll be bigger, it'll be better, it'll be brighter, and it'll be much more polished. Although the reaction to Collision from Home has been really, really positive. If you look online on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, people were really impressed with what was built in such a small space of time. It is worth bearing in mind that was essentially a demo day for the tech and for our engineering team. If they can do that in 4 months, imagine what happens. Imagine what they can put together with 6 months of planning. So I'm really, really excited to see what will be there, how we can engage an audience that might top 100,000 for the first time in the history of our events. The virtual nature of it means that you kind of remove those barriers to travel that may have prevented people from attending in the past. And one thing that's grown over the last few years were people who actually bought tickets with no intention of actually coming to Lisbon, Portugal. So they were buying tickets to access the networking functions, to set up meetings, to use the chat functions, to try and connect with people in a meaningful way, consume that content. So it's funny, Collision from Home almost started 3 years ago when we started to notice people were buying tickets to attend the event virtually. So, and we're really excited with what we can do with WebSummit. How different it will be from Collision from Home will be the scale, the scope. If you thought Collision from Home was good, you will be pleasantly surprised with what WebSummit is. It will essentially become, I feel, the measuring stick for any kind of virtual events. That's the aim of the game. It is to set the bar high and be the standard bearers in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, WebSummit have been very clever from the start, that you do have that engineering team, that you develop a lot of your technology in-house, so you can pivot, that you're not relying on kind of third parties to do a lot of that development for you. So obviously, it's still probably a work in progress of what the event will be in December, but is there anything to share from the sports side about what will be at WebSummit this year? Is it going to be a similar kind of setup, obviously in a virtual context of the usual topics discussed with the usual kind of partners and speakers?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time because the conversations have completely changed. So I don't think anything we'll be doing will be the usual suspects, because the world has changed so much, even in the couple of weeks it's been since Collision from Home. So I would imagine, while we still will retain some of the brightest names in the world, that's our aim of the game, is to bring the most influential people in the world to our events. And allow them to share their expertise, their skills, and practice thought leadership. So we will still be doing that. The context will, of course, change. From a sporting perspective, it's all about the safe restart. It's about fan engagement in this era, how it can be done differently, how it can be improved upon, and what does the new normal look like for mass events with a huge amount of people. How will they be able to proceed without a vaccine? How will they be able to proceed in the era of social distancing? So it's a really, really interesting time from the sports perspective. One thing I've noticed as well personally, just from conversations with people, they have more time in their hands, because sports people, athletes that are active or winding down their career, they're not thinking about their sport right now. They've had such a long downtime. It's allowed them to explore that kind of entrepreneurial endeavor that was within their character. And we're finding, particularly over the last year, players are getting younger and younger when they're coming to our events. When it started, it was retired players would come to events like ours to try and plan for a business life away from their sport. Now it's active players. Now it's players who are still involved, who want to see what's happening. To give you kind of the most recent context, we had Langston Galloway, an active NBA player. He was there. We had Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. He won the Super Bowl a few months ago with the Kansas City Chiefs. And he was there to, explore the entrepreneurial side of things, meet some people from outside the sports. And he's a medical doctor as well, outside of those bubbles, and just try to diversify and network. So I think one of the most interesting aspects of what we're doing and trying to bring these people together is sports stars are a lot younger now and getting involved in these things, which I think is very, very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you're dead right in kind of covering, the sports tech and sports business world. The newsletter, it's moved from the retired player who's looking for a new outlet to kind of get involved, to, our teams, star players setting up their own media companies, their own fashion brands, that they're starting that journey a lot earlier, and kind of making the most of their time as they're the most prominent when they're on the pitch to millions of people around the world watching them. So it's really interesting that they're kind of getting involved, both personally and both potentially from an investor perspective. So what dates are the WebSummit, just so people are aware, so they can add it to the calendar?
So it's shifted from early November into early December, which again gives us a little bit more lead time to build up to it, and also gives us a bit more time to, I guess, plan the physical element of it. So it'll be the first week in December will be WebSummit 2020. We've left our traditional first week in November date. WebSummit.com is going to be an interesting place over the next few weeks because, as you know, we kind of we tease out the schedule, we tease out the speakers, we make additions all the time based on the various different industries we're highlighting that particular week. So you can watch WebSummit essentially be put together in real time on websummit.com because you can see what we're going to be doing with the content, how we're going to be shaping it, and what those conversations will look like for the first week in December. It's a strange thing now because you can have a conversation with someone and make a plan to discuss a particular topic, but after 10 days that could be completely torpedoed and you can go back to the drawing board. So we have to be really dynamic, we have to be agile, and we have to be, I guess, ready to I'm not a fan of the word, I think it's become quite a buzzword. We have to be ready to essentially pivot, which is drop everything you're doing and do something completely different, because by the time you realize that you might be falling behind, it's already too late. So I guess one of the advantages we've had is we've always acted really, really early, particularly with Collision from Home. We made the decision to go online 3 months before the physical event was due to take place, which gave us a really good lead time, while all the other contemporary events just had to cancel outright because by the time they made a decision on what they were going to do, it was too late. So it's going to be a really interesting couple of months in what we're building, and I would encourage anyone who is even a mild or passing interest in an event like ours to check back at the website regularly, because eventually you will see something that will make you realize that you need to be a part of what we're doing.
For sure. And you mentioned there that there's potentially a physical element. Obviously that's kind of subject to Portuguese regulations and guidance from the European Centre for Disease, but is there something in mind that you have right now? How would you like it to look like, assuming everything goes according to plan?
It's hard to know, because even if everything goes according to plan, it's hard to make any kind of plans right now. We've seen around the world places that have emerged from lockdown, Melbourne, Leicester in England, and they've had to go back into lockdown after a couple of weeks. So even if things are looking pretty good now, we don't know what they look like in 3 weeks. So it would be remiss of me to try and pin down what I want it to be. It'll be brilliant no matter what it is. The physical event, I think, or the physical aspect of the event will be really, really interesting, because it gives us an opportunity to engage in the way that we traditionally did, but at the same time, everything we're doing now is pretty much at the cutting edge of the event and the conference space. So what it will physically look like now, it's way too early to tell. And even if I did know, I would imagine it would change by tomorrow morning. It happened with Collision, where we were making plans to produce the content, planning the talks, setting the agenda, working with our media partners and working with our moderators to kind of map out and put some structure on the conversations. And you feel like you had a fully produced and ready to go conversation talk ready to put to air, and then the world changes in an instant. So I'm not going to be predicting. I would either be really, really brave or really, really silly to make a prediction of what the physical event would look like. So if you don't mind, I'll skip that part.
Yeah. So I guess the guidance there is check out websummit.com on a regular basis to see how the plans kind of evolve and see the speakers kind of being announced in real time, as you mentioned. So at the sports tech newsletter that I curate, there's a bunch of trends that kind of come up week on week, and I guess the COVID situation has kind of accelerated a lot of the adoption of technology. Obviously, sports is kind of more of a traditional kind of player, kind of slower to adopt some technologies. Obviously, selling rights to big broadcasters for a lot of money is a great business model, but things have changed. If you look at the Premier League, the Premier League is now being broadcast on BBC. I think it's only like 4 games they got, but that's a huge change in Premier League only being on pay TV to being open to everybody in the UK. So I'm just going to list out a number of different kind of topics, and stop me as you want to kind of chime in. But one of our main kind of topics is kind of the streaming wars. Amazon Prime coming into the UK, taking a couple of rounds of matches, and again an additional 4 as part of this new kind of COVID broadcasting plan that the Premier League have put in place. How interesting is the kind of sports streaming world for you? What have you guys seen at the WebSummit or Collision from Home? Are startups playing in this place, or is it all the big tech companies that are kind of converging around the prized assets in the sports world?
Yeah, for me, there's a surprising amount of innovation in the streaming landscape, because people have realized that the Premier League is not accessible to a small player. You need to have billions behind you to even be in the conversation to buy the rights for those. Similar to La Liga, similar to the NFL, NBA, you cannot access those sports. So you have to find a different way of making your streaming platform work. One of the ones that is really interesting to me, and they played a part, we had their co-founder Zach Wiener involved in Collision from Home and in WebSummit last year, Overtime, and they're an American streaming service which essentially they've identified college and young emerging athletes, the stars of the future. So they use their platform. It's not so much a traditional streaming, or it's more of an OTT platform that's focused on a kind of short, sharp sharing of stuff. You wouldn't kind of binge watch, 6 or 7 hours of it, but you get to meet the athletes of the future, and you get to see who the big college athletes are, even who the big high school athletes are. And these guys are building their brand long before traditional mainstream media will even get a look at them, long before the NBCs or the ABCs or the CNNs are doing any kind of pieces on them. You've got people like Overtime providing a platform for young athletes to get their name out there earlier. So I found it really interesting the way that the smaller players or the newer players in the markets have found gaps to bring mass media consumption to a huge audience without having the household names. They're making their own household names. We've seen that as well with the likes of esports and FaZe Clan. They have built a number of huge personalities. They've built brands on the back of these streamers and gamers without the corporate PR machine behind them, without the mass media coverage behind them. So I think stuff like that is really, really interesting in the way in which they managed to identify, I guess, new charisma, new personality, and give them an outlet. I find it really, really fascinating. And the funny thing is, when you're looking at the likes of the NBA and the NFL and the Premier League, those players they're quite guarded, because they have to protect their brand. I mean, I've run out of the amount of times I've seen a post-game interview that's just mind-numbingly boring, because the player doesn't want to do it. He's not interested. He'll try out the platitudes and the sound bites, and it's not interesting for the viewer. It's definitely not interesting for the player, and I doubt that the broadcaster are getting anything out of it. So it's great to see the outliers make superstars out of these young, hungry, charismatic kids. I think it's a really, really interesting dynamic. And I think more athletes, even the more established athletes, should probably try to replicate what's being done there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that kind of COVID showed us as well is, the influence that sports stars have, and you saw them being a lot more active. Obviously, everyone was trapped at home. So, I think a lot of sports stars found their way onto TikTok. So I think it's been great to kind of see that kind of athlete-driven, user-generated content and the importance of it. Very interesting as well about the Overtime kind of example and the FaZe Clan example that, FaZe Clan, it's an esports team, but, each player that they have there is its own personal brand. So I think, that's something really interesting to watch out for kind of moving forward. And I guess a lot of in the sports tech space, there's a lot of, kind of sub things that kind of fall under fan engagement, fantasy sports, content, social, all these kind of things kind of fall under fan engagement. But what are your kind of thoughts there? Has it changed in the last kind of couple of years? Is it changing even more so now, more rapidly?
I think it has changed. Actually, we had a good conversation with Gilberto Silva about this at Collision from Home. He is working as an agent now. So he works with Fred of Man United. Obviously, had an incredible career himself on the pitch. He won the World Cup with Brazil, was an invincible with Arsenal. And he had a really interesting take on it, where they didn't have an opportunity to promote themselves or engage with their audience in the same way. For them, fan engagement when he was playing was seeing a fan on the street and signing an autograph or taking a selfie. Nowadays, fan engagement is a like on Instagram or a comment on Instagram, or a tweet or a like from your favorite player. It's also given players the opportunity to cut out the traditional gatekeepers. They don't need a BBC football focused feature now to tell people who they are and what their personality is. They have their audience direct. They don't need the middleman. They don't need to have anyone present them to the audience. So I think fan engagement's in a really, really interesting place where the power is shifting, and it's completely gone away from the former power holder, which I believe was the media. It's gone completely now to the actual athlete themselves or the actual sporting brand. We've seen this as well with the way clubs have used in-house media, and they actually see themselves as in competition with traditional media, which, you know, whether or not that's healthy is a debate, I guess, for another day. But it's a really, really interesting time in terms of fan engagement, because it's completely been restructured by social media. It's changed the way athletes talk to their fans. It's changed the way fans talk to athletes. In some ways, it has been for the good. There's a lot of negativity as well. It's particularly made athletes directly faceable to racism. We've seen in the past where athletes are now receiving racist DMs on Instagram or racist messages, where in the past, in the days of newspapers, that didn't really exist. So it's a double-edged sword. Social media has opened athletes up to an incredible opportunity to connect with genuine, good people. But there's also the darker side, where it also allows any crazy person with a racist thought in their head to spout that directly to you. And unfortunately, you might have to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's interesting. You know, you're kind of talking about, you know, players and clubs becoming their own media production companies. You know, they all have, you know, high tech smartphones with great cameras and great audio. And as you say, they're building an audience that they can reach out to. You know, some athletes have, you know, more followers on Instagram than, you know, the clubs that they play for, and certainly bigger than the kind of media companies that are kind of broadcasting the content to people in their homes. So it's very fascinating, and I think the more clubs and players realize the power that they have right now, the better. I was at a talk the other day with Wimbledon, and Wimbledon have brought all their media production in-house, instead of, you know, kind of licensing that out, taking the money. But now they have full ownership of all their content. They can introduce new cameras, and they can make use of that content as they please. So it's really interesting. And, you know, their quote was, "We now see ourselves as a media production company who happens to run the most established tennis competition in the world."
Which is worrying as well, because I think it really, the real loser is the consumer, the actual person who sees this content, because I don't think you really glean anything from a player saying, you know, great results, thanks for the brilliant support, we go again in 2 days' time. You do need the accountability of the media. You do need the media to be able to talk to these people, and not just the players and the clubs have a soapbox at which they don't face any kind of scrutiny or questions. I don't think that's hugely healthy, and I've seen it play out quite often where clubs don't like the coverage they're getting, and they institute nonsensical media bans. And I think there's a very delicate balance here between whether, you know, clubs are in competition with media and whether they're not in competition. I personally don't think they're in competition with media, because I think what the clubs provide is essentially propaganda. It is, everything is fine here, nothing to see. Here's a player, he's playing connect forward, another player. It's all brilliant. We're all rosy in the garden. I don't think fans really even want that stuff. I think they want to know what's happening in their club, warts and all. They want the unvarnished version, because unfortunately, if there's no scrutiny and, you know, things go unchecked for a long time, you end up with a situation like Wigan, which is a club that is in dire financial trouble at the moment. And not to say it's the media's fault for not scrutinizing the owners, but at the same time, if clubs are deciding that they are the communication and they will handle how they are presented or broadcast to the world, I think it puts us down a little bit of a dark path, if I'm honest.
Yeah, you know, very interesting points. I'm a Spurs fan, so obviously Spurs did a deal with Amazon for kind of a fly-on-the-wall documentary. Couldn't have picked a worse season from a Spurs fan perspective. I'm going to be watching from behind the couch, but, you know, I think there will be a lot of warts and all type content that comes out of that. Obviously, will probably break my little heart given the season that we've had, but there is that need for the balance where it's not just, you know, pure spin coming out from the club that everything's rosy in the garden, as you mentioned. So just a couple of other kind of categories. We kind of mentioned esports already. Betting, obviously, you know, Collision is kind of a North American focused conference, so maybe, you know, there might have been some learnings there. Is there anything in the betting space that you guys have kind of seen, any trends or startups that have attended your conferences?
Yeah, we actually, DraftKings went public in the midst of a pandemic, which is all kinds of bonkers. They managed to become a public company in the middle of a pandemic, which has completely crippled many economies around the world. Also, while live sport is completely ground to a halt. And DraftKings, for anyone who doesn't know, are a live sports betting service. They're fantasy betting. So what they managed to achieve was incredible. And we had their co-founder, Matt Kalish, on, and he was basically explaining that just because live sport isn't happening doesn't mean that people don't have a desire to engage in gaming or engage in wagers or betting. So it's a really interesting time. I definitely would have thought before this that the betting or the gambling would have completely ceased when live football operations and live rugby and live sport didn't happen. But I was really pleasantly surprised to learn that that was not the case. People still want to engage in the same way. And it's really interesting because gambling has just been legalized in Canada, which again might seem strange. I'm here in Dublin, Ireland, where gambling and sport have been inextricably linked for the best part of 40 years, 50 years, even longer. And it's natural may not seem like the nicest word to use while describing gambling, but it is quite a natural thing. Sport is at the very nature, at the very essence, when you boil it down and strip it down, it is competition. And that's what people like. People like the idea of feeling like they're part of the contest or having something, I guess, a stake in the game, a skin in the game. So I find the way in which the gambling industry has managed to deal with this, and particularly DraftKings, for anyone who's not familiar with them, I definitely check out their story, because what they've managed to do is nothing short of remarkable. I think it really is an illuminating insight into where that industry is going. And it has to be said, it's one of the only industries that I feel will come out of this stronger than before we went into it.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, and anytime I've had friends over from the States or whatever, walking around Cork in Ireland, seeing betting shops, they're like, "What is that?" Like that is just completely different. Obviously, betting in the US is going under massive changes, but any physical kind of iteration, it's casinos in New Jersey or in Las Vegas. So yeah, the sports betting shop is definitely a bit of a culture shock for a lot of people. And then just kind of finally want to touch on kind of AR and VR. Obviously, we've kind of been buzzwords for a while, but I think the kind of prominent use case is still kind of missing. So like from a sports perspective, what are you guys kind of seeing at your conferences?
There's a huge demand for it, because unfortunately the shift has gone from, in the past, the TV experience was pretty similar to what you see at a game, at an event. You've got two or three cameras. You might see the odd replay. It's not vastly superior to what's happening or the in-stadium experience, but it's transformed in the last 10, 15 years. And NFL has been at the forefront of that transformation, where they've really just changed the way that sport is broadcast and will be broadcast forever, because they've made it now so, and other sports have adapted, that the TV experience is the most complete experience. You see stuff on the TV, you get insight on the TV that you completely miss. It's almost like watching a different sporting event than if you watch it in real life. It's such a strange shift. They haven't managed to embrace AR and VR yet in a meaningful way. I think AR, from a sporting perspective, would be a complete and utter game changer. We've seen the issues with VAR and the way in which soccer has tried to embrace technology without actually getting it right. But there's so much potential in AR and VR, and everyone knows it. You just need that one breakthrough moment, and you need it to come from one of the big players. It needs to come from the Premier League, or it needs to come from the NBA or the NFL. And once it happens, it will completely change the way that we consume sport. The technology is so impressive and so immersive. I did a completely VR experience a while ago in London. I can't say too much about what the actual experience was, but you find yourself so quickly getting lost in the moment, to a point where you're tipping up the visor to actually see what's happening, because you're not really sure of how steady the structure you're standing on is. So it's completely immersive. It can change the way sport is consumed, I think, particularly at home. But the element that's not discussed, it's always talked that AR and VR can improve the the passive experience from your couch. I think it could actually be the opposite. I think it could improve the in-stadium experience. I think it could give you the best of actually being at a stadium and feeling the energy and the atmosphere that comes with being at a live sporting event, but not missing out on all the stuff that you would miss out without the benefits of replay, without the benefits of in-game analysis. So I think there's a massive, massive chance to use it, not just from the TV viewing experience, but the in-stadium experience is the one that needs to be brought up to scratch, because it's fallen so far below what you get on television now. It's almost a tough sell. You know, any live sporting event I attend now, I have to go back and watch it on TV because I don't really have a full picture of what's happened. And because everyone else does, you have a completely different perception of a sporting event if you haven't seen the TV coverage. So I definitely think AR and VR, and from people I've been talking to, sport knows that it will completely transform things. They just haven't, no one has come along and figured out how yet or why. Intel are doing some really, really interesting stuff there. I think they might be the ones to crack the breakthrough. They did something a couple of years ago. They did a Super Bowl ad with Tom Brady, and it was like the 360 all degree camera, but they did it as an advert that it almost was a parody of the technology. So people didn't take the technology seriously because they thought it was just, you know, a Super Bowl advert. People didn't realize that this actually existed. So they're doing really interesting stuff, and hopefully we might see some of it at WebSummit, but I think they might be game changers.
Absolutely, yeah. And does it take someone like, you know, Google acquired North AR glasses recently? Obviously, it's been rumored for a long time that Apple are going to be launching their AR glasses pretty soon. So does it take, you know, the hardware element of AR? Is that kind of the missing piece, or is it the implementation of, you know, all the stats and, you know, replays, as you kind of mentioned? Is that the thing that needs work on?
I think it's the implementation. I think the hardware is there. I think people will quickly embrace it if the product is there. So if there's a good enough reason to use the hardware, if it's improving the experience, you know, tenfold, you'll just do it. So I think the hardware is there. It's reliable. It's impressive. It's really about nailing how you use it, because that's the secret sauce. People know that this can be such a transformative piece of technology for the way in which we consume sport, but no one has figured out how. They know it can do it, but they're just not quite sure what the application is. You just need one test case, and you need one way to kind of make it accessible, because right now it's quite expensive. And the investment in the technology is not worth the return, because right now there's no applicable uses from a sporting perspective. But once there are, I really, really think it'll be taken off, and it'll be embraced by people.
Cool, excellent. Yeah, obviously, I think we could probably speak for hours and hours. You know, there's so many things in the world of sports tech and sports business that you can, you know, look at. We didn't even talk about data or any of the kind of fitness side or the health kind of thing. So yeah, we might have to have you on again closer to Web Summit 2020 to see if there's any updates and maybe dig into a bit deeper in some of the topics. So any kind of final thoughts? Where can people go again to kind of find out about tickets and upcoming events?
Yeah, websummit.com is the place to check in regularly. Bookmark it, add it to your homepage, check it in as often as you can, because it will be built out there. You will see the speaker announcements every couple of days. We'll add new speakers, add new themes, and you can essentially see it be built out in real time. We'll also give a couple of sneak peeks on what the platform will look like. Obviously, the content is an important part of what we do, but the real distinguisher, what will separate us from the rest, what will make us, I guess, the standard bearer or the recognized leader in this space is what we do with the networking. And that was something that we prided ourselves on from Collision from Home. And that's something we'll make sure it's even better for WebSummit. So it's a really exciting time, because I think by December, people will be ready to find some semblance of normality in their lives, whatever normality may look like. Yeah, WebSummit is a good place to see what 2021 and 2022 are shaping up like from a number of different perspectives, because it's not strictly speaking a tech event anymore. It was once a tech event. It's so much more than that. It's grown, it's expanded. You look at the diversity of the lineup this year. You know, you had Aaron Levy from Box, you had Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft. Tucked in there, you had Shaquille O'Neal, you had Grant, Paris Hilton, Margaret Atwood, all household names in their own rights in their own industries, and they were all the one thing all these people had in common. It would be a great pub quiz question. What do all these people have in common? They're all involved in collision from home. So you'll see a similar diverse lineup. You'll see a similar amount of leaders from a number of different industries. And yeah, I'm really, really excited to bring it to people and show you what our engineering team can cook up if you give them 6 months.
Absolutely. And where can people follow you? Are you active on Instagram or Twitter personally, just if they want to get to the sports kind of insights?
Yeah, I tweet regularly enough. If you'd like to follow my Twitter musings, I'm at Radio Cleary.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So thanks a million, Darren. So I'll just stop the recording there. Thanks for that,
Thanks,
man.
Will.